It is great to be with you in mind and in spirit. Unusual circumstances pulled me away from Florida at the last moment on what I think is an important and very interesting mission here in the European Union, and I will talk to you a little bit more about that at the end of our presentation, when I think we'll have a better basis to understand what I am doing here, when perhaps I should be there. I would like to explore the fundamental questions and scientific breakthroughs that shed light on the key questions: what is consciousness, where does it come from, and what are the limits of human potential? But to really understand what consciousness is better than it has been understood for the last century or more, it's really necessary to take a few moments to understand the latest breakthroughs in our understanding of the universe. And by understanding the universe more fundamentally, I think it'll become much more clear what consciousness is and what is its central role in the universe in which we live. It'll be necessary for me quickly to summarize 300 years of scientific research, which I will try to do on a single slide, which really shows at a glance the hierarchical structure of natural law revealed by modern science. This chart shows the structure of the universe from its unified foundation at the basis of this chart to its diversified expressions at the top of this chart. This chart shows the hierarchical structure of natural law from fundamentally unified to superficially diversified. Progress in theoretical physics during the past century has systematically explored deeper levels of intelligence in nature, from the macroscopic to the microscopic, from the superficial to the profound, from the macroscopic to the molecular to the atomic to the nuclear to subnuclear levels of nature's functioning, the electroweak unified scale, the grand unified scale, and ultimately shown at the basis of this chart, at the foundation of the universe itself, the discovery of the unified field of all the laws of nature in the context of what is called the superstring. The latest breakthroughs in modern physics, the latest breakthroughs in modern mathematics, set theory and the Kripke-Joyal semantics of the topos, the latest theories of chemistry in the transition state, all these disciplines of modern science are revealing the fundamental truth of the unity of life. I remember it's been about 15 years since several of my professors were awarded the Nobel Prize for discovering that two of the superficially diverse forces of nature were ultimately one. The force of electromagnetism, responsible for light, for color, for chemistry, for digestion, for virtually every phenomenon that we see around us, with the exception of gravity. This force of electromagnetism and the force of radioactivity, separate forces at the nuclear scale, are seen as two superficially diverse aspects of one unified reality, the so-called unified electroweak field, which reveals itself at distance scales 100 times smaller than the atomic nucleus. 10 million times smaller than the atomic nucleus is the grand unified scale of nature's functioning, where three of the four forces of nature, the strong, weak, and electromagnetic forces, become one. And 10,000 times more fundamental still is the unified field of all the laws of nature, the so-called heterotic superstring field in the language of modern science, natural law governing the universe at every level, the unified source of all the four forces of nature, all the particles in which they act, the quarks and leptons in their bound states as nucleons, atoms, molecules, trees, planets, galaxies, the entire cosmos, and everything in it is just the manifestation of this universal field of intelligence at the foundation of nature. And that's what this chart summarizes. If I could show for a moment this mathematical formula at the top of this chart, which you probably cannot see very well, and you're probably just as glad. At the top of this chart is the mathematical expression of this fundamental unity. It's called the Lagrangian of the superstring, and it's just this simple expression at the top of this chart from which, as this chart suggests, you can sequentially derive every other formula of physics, the entire discipline of physics, quantum mechanics, nuclear physics, solid-state physics, the entire field of chemistry and biology, earth and planetary science, astrophysics, cosmology. Everything that has been discovered about the universe through modern science for the last 3 centuries can be systematically derived from this single compact expression, the self-interacting dynamics of unity at the basis of life's diversity, and the sequential process of what is called symmetry breaking, through which fundamental unity gives rise, step by step, to the emergence of surface diversity, starting with grand unification and electroweak unification, and the nuclear scale, and the atomic scale, and molecular scale, and macroscopic scales, earth and planetary, astrophysical, and cosmological. The entire universe can be sequentially unfolded from this compact expression of knowledge that is not merely my discovery, if in case that was the interpretation of my wonderful introduction by Duncan, but has really become the central focus of modern theoretical physics, and indeed, increasingly, the other scientific disciplines. One of the profound successes of unified field theory is the extraordinary ability to unify the physics of the very large, in particular the force of gravity, with quantum mechanics. Gravity has resisted quantization for 50 years. And it was the very concept of gravity as a separate force that was the logical error. The very concept of separate forces is ultimately, mathematically and logically, inconsistent. The solution to come up with a mathematically self-consistent theory of the world was to abandon the notion of separate forces and separate particles and unite them all in the context of one holistic entity called the unified field or superstring field. Just in short, very short, the way this unification occurs is that there is one universal ocean of intelligence, the so-called second quantized superstring field. But this field of existence percolates strings, like ginger ale percolates effervescent bubbles. These little strings, which emerge from this ocean of existence, are really fundamentally of one type. There is only one expressed entity in the universe. But because these little strings can vibrate in different ways, like elastic rubber bands, vibrating to the left, vibrating to the right, vibrating this way and this way, you can enumerate the number of vibrational possibilities for a string moving in 10 dimensions of space, which, by the way, is the number of dimensions in the universe in which we live, even though we only see 3 of those 10 dimensions of space plus 1 dimension of time. For a technical reason we could go into later if there's time. When you enumerate the possible vibrational states of a superstring, you discover that the string vibrations correspond precisely to what we used to call gravity, or, if it's vibrating a different way, to what we used to call electromagnetism, or if it's vibrating in a different way, what we used to call quarks and leptons, and so on and so forth. All the particles and forces that comprise the universe are just the different vibrational states of the superstring, just the expressions of this unified field like waves on an ocean. These theories are extremely successful and again provide the only logically consistent quantized theory of gravity, forcing scientists, even who were initially reluctant, to accept the superstring and unification as the only possible logically consistent conclusion that we are living in a unified universe. Now I'd like to briefly address the question of where consciousness comes from and fundamentally what consciousness is. Well, one thing we need to know about the hierarchical structure of natural law, again shown in this chart, is that the deeper we go into the structure of reality, from macroscopic at the top of the chart to microscopic at the foundation of the chart, every stage from macroscopic to molecular to atomic to nuclear, the properties of consciousness are becoming more vibrant, more lively, more evident. For example, the property of intelligence is more lively at deeper levels. What does that mean? It means that the laws of nature are increasingly compact. The laws of nature are the orderly expressions that govern the universe. There are laws of nature that give nature its regularity, its repeatability, its intelligibility to the human mind. So the laws of nature are the orderly principles, the intelligent principles that uphold the functioning of the universe everywhere. At deeper levels of natural law, the laws of nature become more compact. At the level of unity, the self-interacting dynamics of the unified field at the basis of diversity, all the laws of nature become absolutely compact. The unified field, as we saw before, was the unified source of all the laws of nature, the unified source of all the intelligence that governs the universe. Therefore, the unified field must be the most compact field of intelligence in nature. Intelligence becomes more concentrated at fundamental scales. Dynamism, another characteristic quality of consciousness. Consciousness is not just intelligent, it's alert, it's dynamic. Dynamism is increasingly vital at more fundamental scales. This is because of the uncertainty principle, the principle of increasing dynamism at smaller scales. That's why nuclear power is 1,000,000 times more powerful than chemical power. Chemical power results from the manipulation of molecular structure. Nuclear power comes from the manipulation of nuclear structures, which are 1,000,000 times smaller, 1,000,000 times more fundamental, and therefore, according to the quantum principle, 1,000,000 times more powerful. The level of superunification, the unified field, is 1,000 million times more fundamental and more powerful than the nuclear force. The energy density, the dynamism at the superunified scale is virtually infinite. And there's another quality of consciousness, the quality of self-awareness, very fundamental quality of consciousness. This property also grows at deeper levels of nature. A superficial force like electromagnetism has none of this property of self-awareness. You could take two beams of light, two flashlight beams, and you can try this experiment at home. You can cross these beams of light and they'll pass right through each other with no scattering, no awareness of each other's presence. However, at a deeper level, the level of unity, the unified field, is highly aware of its own existence. It responds dynamically to its own presence. This is called the nonlinear or non-abelian property of the unified field, the property of self-awareness, self-interaction, self-referral. It's a vitally important fact that the unified field is aware of itself, that it interacts with itself, because there ain't nothing else down there for it to interact with. And therefore, it is its dynamical self-interaction that sequentially brings forth the diversified structure of creation, and so forth. If we look systematically, for example, at this chart, which you cannot see very well, I understand, but it shows in detail that the mathematical structure of the unified field from which you can derive its fundamental qualities rigorously. Qualities like dynamism, intelligence, self-awareness, or self-referral. And so we have a very profound quantitative or qualitative correspondence between this unified field and what we call consciousness, and so forth. I'll come back to this subject. But it's very important, I think, to conclude a startling reversal of what has been assumed to be the case. What has been assumed to be the case is that consciousness is a purely superficial outcome of electrochemical processes in the brain, that is a purely macroscopic epiphenomenon of the macroscopic flow of electricity in the brain. What we're starting to see from this chart is that the qualities of consciousness are not superficial, but are fundamental in nature, that are ubiquitous in nature, that are everywhere in nature. If you scratch beneath the surface of life, beneath the molecular level, into the realms of quantum mechanics, you already see that we're living in a conscious universe. Quantum mechanics and experiments that confirm quantum mechanics and quantum measurement theory show that what's called local realism is a false assumption. The idea that there is something physical, something localizable, that has some claim to reality, that has been overthrown by quantum mechanics and the experiments that support quantum mechanics. The quantum reality is a non-local reality. So what we call material has no place at the level of the atom, at the level of the nucleus. Quantum mechanics is the dynamics of intelligence, the interplay of pure potentiality. The qualities of consciousness are becoming more expressed. The qualities of matter are becoming less expressed at deeper levels. So consciousness and its qualities are not an emergent phenomenon of the macroscopic brain. Consciousness is a fundamental phenomenon that is ubiquitous in nature, that is everywhere. Of course, the macroscopic level, the material world that surrounds us, is just the classical tip of an immense quantum mechanical iceberg, just the superficial crust of existence. And yes, on this superficial level of objects, nature does appear to have a rather inert appearance and inert behavior and lifeless behavior. And after 300 years of scientific investigation of billiard ball mechanics and celestial mechanics, physicists became quite entrenched in the belief that we were living in a dead universe, and that consciousness is only a fluke of the universe, whereas I'm claiming consciousness is fundamental, that it enters existence really from the inside out. So the old story was, consciousness arises as a fluke of the universe, some happenstance, freak coincidence of chemical interactions on the early Earth, in the early atmosphere, in early oceans, resulted in the emergence of self-replicating molecules, which grew over time in their integrated complexity until multicellular organisms and mammals and so forth were born. And then suddenly a miracle occurs. Magically, the meat we call the brain suddenly becomes conscious, and that's the origin of consciousness. That view of consciousness as a purely emergent phenomenon has never worked from the standpoint of philosophy, nor from the standpoint of science. Neuroscientists have never been able to locate that magical spot within the brain from which consciousness comes. It doesn't come from a magical spot within the brain. It comes from within every cell in the brain, and from the DNA at the core of the cell, and the molecular and quantum mechanical behavior of the DNA and the synaptic gaps. Consciousness enters the physical world from the quantum mechanical level, from the inside out. So the old view of consciousness was that consciousness was a fluke of the universe. The new view, based on quantum mechanics, is that matter is a fluke in an overwhelmingly conscious universe. And as soon as you scrape away the crust of matter and delve into the quantum mechanical realm of the atom and the nucleus and so forth, the world becomes alive, increasingly conscious and dynamic, until you arrive at the unified source of creation, the unified field of all the laws of nature, which is a purely non-material field of self-aware intelligence, an infinitely dynamic field that gives rise to the emergence of our universe and an infinity of universes. It is the nature of this unity to give birth to diversity, an infinity of simultaneously coexisting universes is the modern view that comes from quantum cosmology based on the discovery of the superstring. So, I think it's probably obvious to this audience that this fundamental field of intelligence of nature that gives birth to the universe and gives rise to millions of species here on Earth and sustains Earth's ecosystems, these intricate webs of mutual interdependence and mutual interaction, it must be clear that this infinitely dynamic, infinitely creative source of life and source of universes must itself be a field of pure life, not a field of death, not a field of inertia, but the field of pure life, pure consciousness. And that is the proposal that I would like to state and support during the course of this talk and quickly turn to the practical implications of this new view of the universe and new view of consciousness. Most important, this universal ocean of existence, this unified field of intelligence, of consciousness, is not beyond the range of human awareness. And I don't just mean that the most advanced physicists and mathematicians can conceive of it and can formulate it in rigorous and mathematical terms. While that's true, the experience of unity, the knowledge of this universal reality, is really open to every human being in the simplest, most expanded state of human awareness, the so-called meditative state, holistic consciousness, the simplest settled state of human awareness. From the beginning of time, in the great meditative traditions of the world, especially the Vedic tradition, which is really the origin of all traditions of meditation ultimately, there were highly developed technologies of consciousness, techniques of meditation designed to quickly and efficiently open human awareness to the direct experience of this core unity of life. The way these meditation techniques work is they turn human attention powerfully within, as this next chart shows. These technologies of consciousness turn human awareness powerfully within, as shown on the right-hand side of this chart, exploring deeper levels of mind, finer levels of thought, corresponding to deeper levels of intelligence in nature. Ultimately, this inward flow of the mind, this inward march of human awareness, culminates in a state of experience that is beyond thought. Simple, unbounded, universal consciousness. When I say meditation, I perhaps should be more specific, because really there are three things at least that come under the category of meditation, the way it's commonly used. One are techniques of concentration. Concentration are techniques that attempt to focus the mind. And by focusing the mind, concentration keeps the awareness narrowly engaged, narrowly confined to a particular object of concentration. Contemplation techniques, including visualization techniques, involve thinking about some concept that may be uplifting and so forth. But such contemplation also engages the mind and keeps the mind somewhat focused, though less focused, on a particular flow of content, specific as opposed to non-specific. Meditation, as I'm describing it, is a process of transcending. I'll call it transcendental meditation, as it's been called for years and years, because it's a process of systematic reduction of mental activity, experiencing quieter, finer levels of thought until the process of thinking is left behind and one is suddenly left with consciousness alone, the experience of one's own unbounded inner subjectivity devoid of thought. In this state of pure consciousness, because it's purely consciousness, without content, without boundaries, non-specific, universal, this experience, fundamental in every tradition, constitutes, according to modern physiological research, a fourth major state of human consciousness, distinct from waking, dreaming, or sleeping. This fourth state of consciousness, unbounded awareness, is marked by the sudden onset of profound neurological coherence, orderliness of brain functioning, where the entire brain starts to function in an integrated way. This is quite extraordinary. It's this type of coordinated activity of the entire brain, called global EEG coherence, is not seen in any other state of consciousness, whether waking, dreaming, sleeping, hypnosis. It is unique to this meditative state, this holistic experience of consciousness within. This next chart shows at a glance the developing of this extraordinary EEG coherence that begins on the left-hand chart with the appearance of little yellow mountain peaks traveling up the chart during the practice of the Transcendental Meditation program, which is by now certainly the most widely researched and extensively practiced of any technology for the development of human potential in the world. These little yellow mountain peaks indicate more than 90% correlation in the electrical activity of the left and right hemispheres of the brain. With a few more weeks of meditation and several years on the right-hand chart of twice daily meditation, you find that these yellow mountain peaks, this orderliness of brain functioning, starts to span the entire range of the frequencies of cognitive functioning. That means all activity of the brain remains profoundly integrated, and the total brain is engaged 24 hours a day, even after meditation, even during dreaming and deep sleep states of consciousness. The brain functions in a holistic and integrated way just through regular exposure to this experience of unbounded awareness. Now, as an educator, I must point out that even a technology to develop integrated brain functioning represents an educational breakthrough of the foremost magnitude. Why? Because orderly brain functioning is scientifically correlated with intelligence, IQ, growing creativity, improved recall, short-term and long-term memory, improved academic performance, increased alertness, faster reaction time, improved moral reasoning, increased psychological stability, emotional maturity. Everything good about the brain depends on its orderly functioning. And now, orderliness of brain functioning can be systematically, longitudinally developed in students of any age, just by exposing human awareness to its unified source, in the state of pure consciousness in which human awareness identifies with the unified field. I would like to go back for just a moment now and explore once more this connection between this experience of pure consciousness and the unified field. I talked already about the profound qualitative correspondence between this field of consciousness and the unified field identified by physics. Qualitatively, they are the same, unbounded universal fields of pure self-aware intelligence. But if you look more carefully at the quantitative structure of the unified field as available now through modern mathematics, and the quantitative structure of consciousness in its unified state, which is open to direct experience and exploration through transcendental meditation and advanced techniques of meditation from the Vedic tradition of India, especially, you can explore the structure of unity. And, for example, in physics, you can take the unified field and shake it. This, for example, is what is done in a particle accelerator. You're shaking, stimulating the unified field and listening to its reverberant states. It's like banging a guitar. If you bang a guitar, it makes a noise. But very quickly the noise settles down until you begin to hear several pure tones of vibration. Those are called the fundamentals and harmonics of the guitar string. E, C, G, A, etc. Like that, the unified field has its own natural reverberant frequencies. And those reverberant frequencies, which are mathematically derivable from the unified field of physics, correspond one by one to the so-called elementary particles, the graviton, the photon of electromagnetism, and so forth. The fundamental forces and particles that fill the universe are just the vibrational tones of the unified field, the stable waves on the propagating ocean of existence. The whole universe is really just a symphony. Not a material world, but a world purely of vibration, the fundamentals and harmonics of the superstring. Similarly, human consciousness has its natural reverberant frequencies and can be stimulated, and these frequencies can be heard in the most silent, settled state of human awareness, in the meditative state. And the structure of consciousness, shown in this chart, has a very definite, very demonstrable, repeatably verifiable structure. And that structure is shown on the top of this chart. Won't go into great detail here, but it's been recorded and reconfirmed generation after generation by meditators and sages throughout the world. This structure is called the structure of Rik Vade. It's the blueprint of the universe as open to direct experiential confirmation in the meditative state. The bottom of this chart shows the vibrational structure of unity from the standpoint of modern science, and they are identical. Both the ancient Vedic description, open to direct experiential confirmation, and the modern mathematical description have the same structure of 192 syllables, or fundamental tones, divided into three categories we could call pertaining to Rishi, Devata, and Chandas, but the names don't matter. Quantitative, one-to-one correspondence between the structure of the unified field of physics and the structure of the unified field of your own consciousness, open to direct verification in the silent, most expanded state of human awareness. And there are many other reasons we can and will even go into briefly later that confirm the fundamental identity of our own pure consciousness, our self, our very subjectivity, and this universal intelligence that gave birth to the universe. All of this is that. So I want to state very unequivocally and very clearly, because it's been a little bit confused, I think, in the past. Even at good conferences, it gets confused. The unified field is consciousness, universal consciousness. Consciousness is the unified field. There is no consciousness other than that. The consciousness we associate with the mind and with thinking, it is reflected consciousness, just as a colored glass vessel reflects light from the sun. But the vessel itself is not the source of light. The human mind is not the source of consciousness, it is the reflector of consciousness, a universal consciousness which is open to direct experience when the mind settles completely and the thinking process is transcended and pure consciousness alone exists, wide awake within its universal settles completely and the thinking process is transcended and pure consciousness alone exists, wide awake within its universal nature. That is the meditative state. It is that state that has become the subject of intensive scientific research and research in the field of brain development, and it is the experience of that holistic consciousness, universal consciousness, which is so fundamental to education and the proper development of the brain. So what I'd like to go on to discuss with you now in a little bit more detail, having established what consciousness is, the unified field, and where it comes from, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the limits of human potential and the practical application of this discovery to life. Well, I talked a few moments ago about the impact of opening human awareness to the holistic experience of the meditative state in what it does in terms of the long-term development of the brain, bringing orderliness of brain functioning, which means orderly speech, orderly action, effectiveness in action, and scientifically correlates with intelligence and all those good functions of the brain, as shown in this chart. And the many, many studies that have been done at universities all over the world that shows that just this meditative experience in a college or high school setting longitudinally develops IQ and intelligence and creativity in subjects, especially in students, which is an extraordinary breakthrough. Until now, the concept of human potential has been very primitive and, unfortunately, very discouraging. The common view has been that intelligence peaks at adolescence, and then, with the dying off of brain cells and so forth, undergoes a slow and tortuous decline. Of course, as we get older, we like to satisfy ourselves that our wisdom and experience makes up for the loss of raw material in the brain, that we become wiser, if not more intelligent. But all of that is absolutely a thing of the past. It's a very bleak and incorrect view of human potential. The hardware of the human brain and its malleability, its flexibility, is so extraordinary that the brain can continue to learn and develop in its creative potential throughout life. But what seems to be essential to unlock the hidden resources of our brains is to regularly refresh the brain by taking our awareness from its very narrow boundaries of experience and specialization and reacquaint the mind and experience the unboundedness which is the true nature of human consciousness. That experience develops the brain, and it allows the longitudinal growth of intelligence and so forth, whereas without that experience, the brain does seem to atrophy. It turns out, perhaps, that this pure consciousness experience, the meditative state, is as important for the proper development of the brain as is waking, dreaming, and sleeping. But unfortunately, education hasn't had any program so far to systematically deliver that experience of unbounded awareness in any systematic way to any student. One more chart I wanted to share with you is very striking, actually, and that is what tends to be all too often the fruit of education without this fundamental meditative experience. Education increasingly focuses human awareness into smaller and smaller channels of specialization. Indeed, this process begins early in life. In the first month or so of human life, EEG coherence is profound and awareness is extremely broad. After about a month or 2 months, the child learns to focus that broad awareness through the sense of sight and begins to recognize the face of his mother. Over the course of the next few years, a child becomes more proficient at recognizing the environment and manipulating the environment, and learns to focus the attention more and more sharply. Then in school, the students are rewarded for more and more increasingly specified behavior, localized performance, especially at the graduate level, where as a master's student, you soon discover you're learning more and more about less and less. And by the time you get to the doctoral level, you recognize too late that you've become the world's greatest expert in nothing. I remember my thesis subject, my PhD thesis was called Weak Mass Mixing, CP Violation in the Decay of B-Quark Mesons. How many of you have read it? Almost everybody. The problem is not really with the specialization. The problem is with the lack of globalization, the lack of regular experience of unbounded awareness in which the attention is withdrawn from those very confining, narrow boundaries of experience to once again restore the experience of one's true nature, which is unbounded universal consciousness. And without regular alternation of the non-specific with the specific, with the unbounded, with the localized, without that regular experience, the awareness gets stuck. It's like we become cerebrally myopic. We see the parts, but we lose the whole. And that's why regular meditation, regular transcending is important to expand, almost as if by force, expand comprehension to be global and maintain that flexibility in the mechanism of the brain to be able to maintain global comprehension, cosmic comprehension, while sharply focused within the narrow boundaries of thought and action. This chart shows what happens when you do not do that. It shows a very lopsided development of the brain, particularly in the right-hand chart, where you see the emergence of what are called functional holes in the brain. Now, functional holes are not physical holes in our gray matter, but they are areas of the brain that just aren't functioning, where the neurons aren't firing. And this can be revealed very easily in what are called PET images, where you measure the blood flow in the brain. What happens, unfortunately, in education as it currently exists in the world, which is all about the teaching of isolated facts, the brain becomes very competent in a specific narrow channel of activity, but the holistic functioning of the brain gets lost. And that leads to an imbalanced development of the brain, and that can become entrenched into these metabolic imbalances called functional holes. And as that chart showed, you typically see a clustering of these functional holes in the critical prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is supposed to be our rational filter against primitive, aggressive, impulsive, violent behavior. Under stress, the prefrontal cortex shuts down, and the primitive brain takes over. The process of transcending in meditation restores functioning of the entire brain, as shown in the brain encephalogram, global EEG coherence, And by engaging the total brain, where all the neurons are firing, in an integrated way, restores blood flow to the brain, where even severe metabolic imbalance can be reversed and a balanced brain functioning can be restored, even in maximum security inmates and violent offenders. So it's vitally important in education that the brain is allowed to develop holistically in a balanced way. And that requires not just exposure to isolated facts of knowledge and specific avenues of specialization, but regular expansion to experience our global reality, our cosmic reality. And that expanded comprehension is vitally important for one more reason, and that is the reason I would like to call development of global citizenship. Global citizenship is the ability to act locally, which of course we must with our localized brain and localized body, but not losing comprehension of the whole, maintaining expanded, actually unbounded awareness, even while functioning within the realm of boundaries. And that keeps every action ideally coordinated with the whole. That expanded comprehension is what it takes in order to act in a way that, of course, fulfills your own best interests, but simultaneously promotes the interests of society as a whole. Non-polluting behavior, non-violent behavior, life-supporting behavior is the result of proper education that restores expanded comprehension. As a physicist, there's one more way I like to describe this. The unified field, which is open to direct experience in this fourth state of consciousness, the meditative state, is the totality of all the laws of nature united in one holistic structure of reality. When the totality of natural law, the unified field, is fully lively in the nature of human awareness, fully enlivened in the individual brain physiology, then thoughts and actions arising from this field of total natural law, the unified field, remain so suffused with total natural law that behavior is aligned with natural law, in harmony with natural law. An action in harmony with natural law, behavior in accord with natural law, is behavior that is aligned with that all-nourishing intelligence that gave birth to the universe, that sustains the universe, that gave rise to millions of species in Earth's complex ecosystems and upholds and nourishes them all. Human awareness can become aligned with that all-nourishing evolutionary intelligence that sustains the universe, and spontaneously life-supporting action, life-nourishing behavior results from enlivening the totality, expanded comprehension in individual awareness. Let me summarize these points in this one slide. Higher education should be for higher consciousness. That means it should develop the brain holistically so that the truth of unity, the scientific truth of the unity of life, is a living reality in daily life. And, of course, as a side benefit, intelligence increases, creativity increases, academic performance, health improves, and so forth. I would say that the incorporation of holistic experience, the unified field, for total brain development should precede spending for new prison construction, for internet education, and so forth. All of these things, prison construction, internet education, should take absolutely a second role at best behind introducing into education the fundamental experience of the unity of life, which develops the brain holistically. That is what is key. The implications for society I briefly touched on. Global citizenship. Maximally expanded human comprehension for maximally and spontaneously life-nourishing behavior. And final point I would like to come to in a moment is that schools, universities, colleges can actually become powerhouses of coherence for the entire society due to what I'd like to call field effects of consciousness, the radiated influence of peace that comes from the experience of individual peace deep within. But first I'd like to make one more point about enlightenment, and why it's called enlightenment, and why it is also sometimes called freedom or liberation. Enlightenment I would like to precisely define as the stabilization of one's experience of one's true unbounded nature, the stabilized experience of one's own cosmic intelligence along with dynamic behavior. In waking consciousness, unfortunately, this is not the case. Waking consciousness means being aware of something from the moment the alarm clock goes off in the morning to the moment we fall asleep at night. We are always aware of something, whether it's the alarm clock, whether it's the realization that I'm late for work, or whatever it is. Waking state is one endless movie of one specific experience followed another. What one does not have in waking consciousness is the experience of the experiencer. Consciousness, the knower, is not known. So one gains the experience of one's relative objects, but loses the experience of oneself. That's the nature of waking consciousness, and it's due to the lack of flexibility in the brain to simultaneously uphold unbounded awareness, which is our true self, with the localized boundaries of sensory experience. That's a tragic loss. Tragic because the experience of unbounded awareness, the experience of our true cosmic self, is an experience of bliss, of absolute contentment, of unboundedness, beyond which there's nothing really worth achieving. So that inner bliss, inner satisfaction, inner contentment is overthrown in waking consciousness by the object of experience. If you're enjoying mashed potatoes for dinner, and you like mashed potatoes, it's all right. You have at least the experience of the potatoes, even if you've lost the experience of your unbounded blissful self. But if you're having okra for dinner, and all that is left in that waking consciousness at the moment is the experience of okra, then the entire life, basically, at that moment, has really dumped down into a rather tragic state. But waking consciousness by nature is ups and downs, good experiences followed by bad experiences, where the ultimate good, the bliss of life, which is the reality of life, is lost. Enlightenment is also therefore called self-realization. It is called self-knowing, because the true nature of oneself is known. And it is called liberation, because even though you still enjoy the potatoes and perhaps don't enjoy the okra so much, you have freedom from the binding experience of that action, because that small experience is always underlied by and supported by the experience of one's unbounded blissful nature. So I guess what I would like to emphasize before switching the subject a little bit is the experience of enlightenment is not something to be missed. It is the most important experience of life, if even for its side effects of increasing intelligence, creativity, dynamism, ability to easily achieve one's aspirations. That's all a side effect of the maximum development of the brain, the development of the total brain. The main feature of a properly developed brain is unbounded awareness, that one is never lost to the cosmic nature of one's blissful self. If you are practicing some program of meditation that is not very, very quickly, within a few minutes maybe, giving you that experience of unbounded awareness, I would recommend perhaps experimenting with something else. The research I'm presenting today is on transcendental meditation because it's the most ancient system of meditation in the world with thousands of years of cherished tradition. It's also the most heavily researched and most widely practiced and broadly prescribed system of meditation in the world. But whatever it is that you practice, be sure, without long delay, without too much waste of time, you're quickly swimming in that unbounded awareness, the stabilization of which is really the goal of meditation, which is life in unbounded awareness, enlightenment, and maximum support of nature at all times for the fulfillment of your desires. The final point I would like to talk about is the application of enlightenment and of meditation for peace. Not surprisingly, the experience of unbounded inner awareness, the experience of the core unity of life, brings about a state of individual peace. In fact, the unified field is a field of peace, a field of unity, the reconciliation of all opposite values in creation, the unification of dynamism and silence, the unification of force fields and matter fields, bosons and fermions, all the opposite qualities that comprise the manifest universe, exist in togetherness, in absolute unity, at the level of the unified field, which is therefore fundamentally a field of peace. The experience of this field brings the experience of deep peace. But more interestingly, this influence of peace is infectious. It spreads throughout the society. Every individual has an inevitable influence on your neighbors, on your families, on your work environment. No man is an island is an old expression, and it's absolutely true. Particularly if enough people are meditating and experiencing a state of deep peace within, enough of an influence of peace gets communicated, peace gets radiated into the surrounding society, that you can measure marked reductions of social stress and violent crime, for example, which is a symptom of social stress, marked reductions in terrorism, even the reduction and cessation of open warfare in war-torn areas, if enough people are simultaneously engaged in this experience of unity through meditation. We can think of it this way. Transcendental meditation is being prescribed throughout the world by hundreds of thousands of doctors. For what? Mainly for the reduction of individual stress and the diseases born of stress. And most diseases caused by stress. Hypertension, heart disease, stroke. 90% of disease is caused or complicated by stress. Similarly, social disease like violent crime, domestic abuse, drug dependency, violence, terrorism, war, these are all manifestations of accumulated social stress. We're living in an epidemic of stress. Doctors report everywhere a rise of stroke and hypertension, heart disease, and similarly a rise in tension and terrorism throughout the world. It is possible to diffuse this acute social stress through the spillover effect of individual meditation. Another way of seeing it, perhaps more profoundly, is this. Because consciousness is a field, the ripples of consciousness produced by accessing and stimulating this field of consciousness deep within produce an effect that literally, physically ripples throughout the environment. When you have groups of individuals collectively meditating, those ripples add together to produce a bigger wave. And remarkably, the power of any wave is proportional to the square of the magnitude of the wave. I think I can show that here. In this example on the computer of loudspeakers, we show an image of 3 loudspeakers producing the same music, playing the same sound. If you put those loudspeakers close together, those 3 sound waves add into a wave that is 3 times as high. But the power, the sound volume in that taller wave is not proportional to the height of the wave, that is 3 times more, but to the square of the height of the wave, which is 9 times more. The practical lesson in that is, if you put 3 loudspeakers together, you get 9 times the sound of a single loudspeaker. That is because of this universal principle of what's called constructive interference, the coherent summation of amplitudes. Similarly, if you put individual meditators together in physical proximity, and they are collectively experiencing and stimulating this universal, unified field of consciousness, it produces a larger wave, a coherent wave, and the power of that wave and the influence of peace and unity that is radiated grows, according to research, as the square of the number of meditators, which means that a group of the size of the audience in your hall is really enough to produce a palpable influence of peace throughout the state of Florida at least. provided your brains are in sync, that is, provided you are meditating and transcending together, stimulating this universal field of peace. It is therefore possible to target and neutralize the root cause of social violence and war. And the root cause of war, according to anyone in the field of conflict resolution, is always rising tensions among rival factions in critical hotspots throughout the world. If you can create a powerful calming influence, a unifying influence, social coherence, and diffuse this accumulating societal stress, then you can neutralize the root cause of the outbreak of war. It sounds remarkable, but it's absolutely true. You can't eliminate social stress completely, but you can keep it below the boiling point. And that's a very good analogy. Water boils at 212 degrees. Milk boils at 212 degrees. If you have a situation of increasing heat, increasing turbulence, and the milk reaches 212 degrees and starts to boil over, what do? Well, naively, you might try to put a lid on the milk and try to forcefully hold it down. But if you try that, it doesn't work. Someone with more experience would take a few drops of cool water, sprinkle it on the surface of the milk, and suddenly the whole thing settles down. Because even at 1 or 2 degrees below the boiling point, milk stops boiling. Like that, through a group of even 1,000, or say several thousand meditators meditating together on a regular program of extended meditation, this produces enough of a indomitable influence of coherence and unity and harmony that these tensions and societal stress is easily neutralized, and you can turn off war, even in war-torn areas of the world. There has been so much research published on this in the world's foremost scientific journals over the past 25 years, I hardly need to dwell on it anymore. Just historically, it might be fun to look, for example, at this study, which examined the influence of group meditations on the intractable war in the Middle East during the peak of the Lebanon War. Scientists from 8 different universities established scientific collaborations to measure the effect of collective meditation on the Lebanon War. And in every single incidence, whenever a group was trained and assembled in the Transcendental Meditation Program and an advanced technique called the TM Siddhi program, which is specifically designed to neutralize societal stress. It's an advanced form of Transcendental Meditation for this purpose, which really produces very, very powerful ripple effect of unity and harmony in the environment. On all 8 of these consecutive experiments, there was marked reduction of social violence and war, 80% reduction of war deaths, 80% reduction in war injuries, marked reductions in level of conflict, vastly improved progress towards peace and negotiations among the rival factions, and so forth. Such a remarkable phenomenon that it has created a whole industry within the field of social science, measuring the remarkable influence of group practice of the TM meditation and advanced techniques to reduce social violence and war. And it's really extraordinary. Every one of these studies was highly statistically significant, less than 1 part in 100,000, that any one of these results was due to chance, was merely a statistical fluke. And if you put these studies together, the likelihood that this phenomenon of the reduction of war as a result of group meditation, the likelihood that that was a mere statistical fluke is less than 1 part in 10 million, making this effect of creating peace through group meditation the most rigorously established and thoroughly studied of any phenomenon in the history of the social sciences. All absolutely what one would expect, with the fundamental understanding that consciousness is not a phenomenon that is limited to this finite brain, but is a universal phenomenon, that we all have access to universal consciousness in the most expanded state of human comprehension. So we really have at this point a technology of peace, scientifically proven, and urgently needed in the world today. I would like to end by providing some of the news of what we're doing with this remarkable knowledge and what you can hopefully do with this remarkable knowledge and what I'm doing here in Europe at this time. First is the phenomenon of what's called the peace government in 108 countries throughout the world. The idea is simple. Conventional governments are all about crisis management. Conventional governments are run by politicians who essentially are skilled in the art of getting elected. They know how to raise special interest money from corporate sponsors to run an aggressive campaign and to get elected. But is that really the skill set we need to move our globe into the 21st century? And the answer is no. So the peace government has been established to govern absolutely silently, not on the level of problems, nor on the level of crisis management, but on the level of prevention of problems. And how do you prevent problems? Well, the easiest way to prevent problems, in my opinion, as an educator, is through education. Education that develops the brain completely and that aligns human behavior with natural law. So that behavior is naturally life-supporting, naturally life-nourishing. That is the result of truly modern education that gives direct experience of the unified field and develops consciousness holistically. If you can bring the behavior of the people into accord with natural law, then all the problems that are born of mistakes, the ill health that we inflict upon ourselves by mistakes in what we smoke or what we eat or what we drink, how we conduct our lives and so forth, those mistakes can be avoided when one thinks and acts and eats spontaneously in a healthy way, in accord with natural law. When one does not behave in a damaging way towards others or towards our physical environment, which results again naturally with expansion of human comprehension. When one lives the truth of unity of life, one begins to perceive others as oneself. One lives the scientific truth that there is ultimately only one consciousness, which manifests in this person and manifests in this person, and despite surface differences of race or creed, all individuals are unified at their core. When the core experience of unity is a living reality in enlightenment, then individuals automatically see the truth of unity and behave towards others automatically as one would behave towards oneself. And the golden rule of behavior is automatic. In a lesser state of consciousness, with cramped human comprehension, extreme narrowness of vision, this golden rule of behavior seems hopelessly impractical. Why would I do anything for somebody else when I could instead act in my own best interests? That's the view of life with cramped comprehension. Expanded comprehension, one literally perceives self as other and other as oneself. And in that state, one can only act in an adoring way, in a life-enriching way to anybody else. So, global citizenship, globally life-supporting behavior is the spontaneous result of proper education. So education really is the core activity of the peace governments in every country, which are not comprised of politicians. They're comprised of the top educators in every country, the top scientists in every country, the top medical researchers of every country, the organic farmers in every country who know how to farm sustainably and organically. So the government of peace is about giving proven, prevention-oriented knowledge and solutions to everyone in society, and most importantly, two things: education, to bring the life of everyone more spontaneously in accord with natural law, for freedom from mistakes and problems born of the violations of natural law and wrong behavior. And secondly, the peace government's primary focus, because there's no time to waste here, and we have to do something that's going to have immediate effects. The peace government is really focused on establishing larger groups of meditating experts at universities and colleges anywhere and everywhere where the faculty are open to giving their students the experience of unity, with a side effect of increasing intelligence, creativity, IQ, etc. And this is becoming increasingly acceptable because meditation can now be understood on a scientific basis with demonstrable impact on the development of our physical brains. So it's no more, an exclusively spiritual, or certainly not a mystical understanding. The neurophysiology of enlightenment is a very real subject and of absolutely undeniable benefit to any student anywhere. So we're trying to establish and are establishing coherence-creating groups of peace-promoting, meditating experts. And we can do this anywhere, in a factory, in a prison, within the military. And all of those initiatives are underway, but most natural to provide this experience in an educational setting where people are already attending a school for the sake of the development of the brain, for the sake of the development of wisdom and of knowledge. Now we can enhance the learning process while turning any university into a powerhouse of peace, a particle accelerator of peace for the world. I am currently the professor of physics and director of the Institute of Science, Technology, and Public Policy at Maharishi University of Management in Iowa, USA. I went there from Stanford University faculty as part of a wonderful experiment to see what would happen to education in the conventional sense of academic performance when we added to the curriculum the experience of consciousness to develop the brain holistically. We introduced the concept of education for enlightenment, higher education for higher consciousness. 22 years later, I'm still at Maharishi University, which has achieved extraordinary results in every area of student life and student performance, and having won, even at the school level, high school and junior high school, essentially every conceivable award that the state and the country has to offer in the fields of speech and drama and science and even sports. So it's just a remarkable learning phenomenon, and a phenomenon that must be cloned so that colleges, universities, high schools, everywhere give experience of this core reality, which is so central to the proper development of the brain. We are in the process of expanding Maharishi University in Iowa to become a true university of peace. A university with enough students to really produce a profoundly peaceful influence on the U.S. and the world. 2,000 students, frankly, is enough, which is about double what we currently have. 2,000 would be enough, according to all this published research, to powerfully influence the decision-making in the United States and to really help bring the U.S. population into a more, say, harmonious and peaceful direction. In addition, we would like to open a branch campus in Washington, D.C., have a University of Peace right in the nation's capital, and this we're doing. The land has been acquired. The buildings are about to be built. The colleges in Washington, D.C. are starting to offer 4-credit courses on transcendental meditation, training students to be peacemakers, students who will come and do their summers at the University of Peace campus and even transfer to the University of Peace. Why Washington, D.C.? To produce a concentrated influence of sanity in the capital city of U.S. and in the current administration of the United States, which one could argue is making decisions that are not necessarily in the life-nourishing direction for the world. People who are fond of the concept of peace through perpetual war have a natural champion in George Bush and the current administration, and that's fine. It's a free country. But for those who think that peace is the way to peace, particularly now with the discovery of a field of peace that's millions of times more fundamental and powerful than the nuclear force, if it could only be harnessed, and it can be, to produce indomitable influence of positivity and peace so strong that negativity in war simply won't arise. We can neutralize the enmity in a potential adversary before the adversary rises against us, rendering war essentially a thing of the past. And when war becomes an institution of the past through a preventive approach, proven preventive approach, then nuclear weapons and other weapons, offensive weapons, become obsolete and irrelevant. And that is the way to gain invincibility, real national security today. There is no conventional defense against a nuclear strike. There's no conventional defense against weapons of mass destruction in the hands of terrorists. The only defense is the preventative defense. Prevent the very birth of an enemy by neutralizing the enmity in a potential adversary, by producing indomitable ways of unity and coherence and positivity that radiate throughout the whole environment, even on a global scale. We'd like to soon have 8,000 peacemakers at a university of peace to produce enough influence for global peace. And this has been done in published research on at least 3 occasions where groups of 8,000, the square root of 1% of the world's population, have been assembled and trained in these advanced peace-promoting meditations, and the result has been 80% reduction in global terrorism, etc., etc., all published in leading peer-reviewed scientific journals. It's a fact. It's a technology that must be used. So, as a counterbalance to the thousands of military academies and graduate war colleges dedicated to advancing the science of war, let there be one university on earth dedicated solely to the prevention of war and the promotion of peace, and training a new profession in the world, not of soldier, but of professional peacemaker, individuals with the responsibility and capability to actually prevent war, an army of peacemakers. And now finally, what I'm doing here, in France and the Netherlands, as you're all aware, there was a very dramatic and very surprising no vote against the European Constitution, and a major upheaval in the life of France, in dividing the collective consciousness in the life of the Netherlands, and in fact throwing the entire European Union into a state of turmoil. We've been invited here to actually begin to focus on implementing in Europe, in Brussels, at the capital of the European Union, and in France, and in Holland, and in other countries, actual peace-promoting groups of meditating experts to create an integrated national consciousness, cohesion in national consciousness, to bring the country together. The problem with the European Union, frankly, has been that the unification has been on too superficial a level. Life is fundamentally unified, and there will be an inevitable trend towards globalization now that the unified field has been discovered, now that the scientific truth of unity has been established, and especially now that more and more people are actually beginning to culture the experience of unity, living higher states of consciousness through their regular practice of transcendental meditation and so forth. So unity is inevitable, globalization is inevitable, but not on a superficial level. The people of France are rightfully concerned that by imposing unity on a political level, that the precious French culture and precious French cuisine and precious French language, etc., will be homogenized with Germany, homogenized with the Netherlands, and so on. And naturally there's a fear to protect one's cultural integrity. And that fear is natural if the unification is forced. But the unification was never meant to be, should not be conceived as being on the surface level, which is a beautiful mosaic of diversity of life. The reality of unity is not on the surface of life, but at the core of life, beneath the molecular, beneath the atomic, beneath the nuclear levels, at the level of the unified field. And on the ground of unity, when that unity is awakened in the consciousness of the people, they live the truth of unity of life at a core level, while celebrating the diversity of one's rich cultural heritage. Cultural differences will only blossom as a beautiful garden blossoms in reds and greens and blues and yellows when the garden is fertile and healthy. So really enlivening the core unity, which is only at the level of the unified field, the level of our own innermost universal consciousness. On the ground of unity, globalization will be achieved on a real level, but not on the level of surface homogenization of cultures. So it's relieving that fear of the loss of one's cultural integrity that we are here now, and the peace governments of France and of Brussels and of the Netherlands have invited us to come and quickly create with them, the top scientists of Europe, to collectively create these coherence-creating groups to restore unity and peace at a time when Europe really is in quite a precarious state of turmoil. So that is the reason I'm here, and I apologize for that reason. I'm not physically there, but the picture looks clear, and I hope the audio has been clear, and it really has been a tremendous joy to speak with you from a distance, and such a hopeful sign that this movie, What the Bleep, is achieving such extraordinary following. It's a sign and a wake-up call to Hollywood in particular that the people are not after a Western adventure, not exclusively. The people are ready for profound knowledge. The knowledge of unity, knowledge of reality. And of course, the film is a powerful medium to present that knowledge of the truth of life. What the Bleep very, very skillfully does so. And the fact that it has such far-reaching following even in Europe now is showing everybody that it's the time to deliver something of quality, something of depth, something of world-transforming significance. And what I would like to say in conclusion is that this movie and the knowledge it contains has world-transforming significance. And to make it really significant and really transformational, it now has to be moved to the practical level, where instead of talking about unity and theorizing about consciousness, we experience unity. We experience consciousness. We grow in enlightenment. And we become, each of us, radiators of peace and unity, living, breathing, peacemakers. And anyone with the desire to grow quickly, I would urge at least to learn the Transcendental Meditation technique and experience very, very quickly maximum expansion of human comprehension, and if possible, give yourself an opportunity to experience consciousness-based education, this unified field-based education. Come and visit us in Iowa and soon in Washington, D.C., even for a weekend. Come to a visitor's weekend. I'd be very happy to host you there and give you first-hand exposure to education for enlightenment, consciousness-based education, and give a taste of what education really can be. Not just for student-age people, but for people of all ages. Even a month, even a semester at Maharishi University would be an absolute awakening. It would really put one very strongly on the path of higher states of consciousness. So I very much hope to see as many of you there as possible to come and visit us and gain a taste of these technologies for the development of human consciousness, and to become in yourselves professional peacemakers. Even while your profession may be something else, there's no reason one cannot be a radiator of peace oneself, for one's family, for one's work environment, for one's community, and for the world. So I very much appreciate the opportunity to address you, and if time allows, I'd be very, very happy at this point to take questions from you there. Thank you very much from Holland. Thank you.